During my investigation of the word God, it became clear from several sources that there was a potential etymological link between God and Goth, as in the name of the fierce German tribes that threatened the Romans and fought off the Huns. As per the custom around here, the word Goth is once again murky and not so simple to parse out. And it isn't weird that the first time we see the word God is in the Gothic Bible? And if we don't know what God means, maybe if we figure out what its cousin Goth means, we can backtrack and see if we can land on a final answer for God. As per the custom around here, the word Goth itself is once again murky and not so simple to parse out. But we still have a number of clues to go from. But to top off this Jormungandric Irony Sunday is that if you go watch the first entry, is God related to the word Godon, an Odinic name from the Lombards? The more I looked into the word God, and then later Goth, I keep finding Odin at the bottom of this rabbit hole. So let me know what you think about it toward the end, and watch the first two entries into this series. When you hear or think of the word Goth or Gothic, what does it conjure for you? I had expressed a fascination at the word Goths' linguistic flexibility in the last video, naming several aesthetics and movements associated with this one word, all stemming from the name of the Germanic peoples, a loose term here, if I'm dotting my T's correctly. And I suppose from all the pictures presented, it definitely does its thing loudly. From associations with the end of civilizations and yet also their highest achievements, something about it just seethes the sublime. I had surmised that maybe since the word God and Gothic share an etymological root, that when you hear of like Gothic cathedrals or Gothic aesthetics, or that perhaps the sonic frequency connection invokes some extra oomph, if you will, when we hear or speak them, activating dormant archaic wiring in our brains from ancient terms and drawing deep unconscious meanings from them. As a reminder, there's a mystery root to the word God, or technically Gaut, as it is originally rendered in the Gothic Bible. And most scholars land on some sort of interpretation of it being associated with spiritual connotation, whether it was invoking a deity or forced through prayers or worshiping through libations or pouring. It just so happens that God and Goth share a potential etymological parent, Proto-Indo-European gu, to pour. Seriously, think about the implications. The word God, like the highest being in our English-speaking language itself, right? There are gods and gods. There's nothing higher than that, right? Isn't it strange that the word is delivered to us by some tribal peoples that also shares a potential root with that very word? And once again, I just keep trying to stress the Jormungandric weirdness of the whole thing. It would be like as if Texans wrote a new Texan Bible, and that the name or the word that we used for, because I say we, the word that we used for God was somehow like Tex. Like, what the heck, what would that mean? Wouldn't that be kind of odd and strange if that's how it all kind of played out in a sense? And that's essentially what I'm sort of saying, what happens here. And all I'm trying to do is, well, if we figure out maybe what Texan meant, we can figure out what Tex means or something, or vice versa, right? So the main problem is determining just what was being gooed or poured or speculated to be libations or dirt upon a tumulus in the Greek or Proto-Indo-European sense potentially, or sacrificial blood, or metaphors for running water itself. We've got a real mystery on our books over these words we've inherited. What did this goo potentially refer to? Pliny the Elder in 77 AD mentions a Germanic peoples called the Gutones. Later, Tacitus in 90 AD, the Gothones, and again by Ptolemy the Greek geographer, the Githones, all living near the same general geographical area. Therefore, many scholars have concluded that these folks are not only the same, but are in fact the Goths. Referred to as the Goton, plural in Old English, and Goti, singular, Gotars, plural in Old Norse. The Goths would have called themselves Gutons. In the Gothic language, found as a runic inscription on the ring of Pietrosa, has the term Gutoni, Ingui, Halag. And this potentially means either 1, the hallow wealth of the Goths, 2, hallow the god of the Goths, Ingvi, or another name for the god Freyr, 3, the sacred heritage of the Goths, or 4. The sacred heritage of the Gutar. The Gothic word Giutan, to pour, appears related to the word Gutan itself, their own names. I've seen several interpretations over how to contextualize this pouring attestation, and how or why the Goths Gutans could mean the poured ones. How would they land on that name? Why would they call themselves we're the poured ones? Like, what's going on? What does that mean? By the way, you will see various spellings like Gutones, Gutans, Gatones, Gutones, and many others, I imagine, which has been a real nuisance to keep track of. We haven't even gotten to the Gittae, Geats, Hydgrotans, and Visigoths or Ostrogoths. So let's go with the first etymological potential parent for the word Goth. So yeah, I'm just going to start rambling off tons of different sources and potentials for a lot of this stuff, and so yeah, let's do this. Pour, as in gush, spawn, sperm, men, begotters? The first reliable attestation of Gutones is found in Pliny. Earlier knowledge of the name is Pythias and Strabo. Is possible but not certain. All evidence points to the region south of the Baltic Sea. After Ptolemy, we also hear of a tribe called the Gotar in Middle Ages. Ptolemy, Procopius, and indirectly Jordanus placed this tribe on the Scandinavian island. The etymological kinship between the name stems Gutan and Gauta is much beyond doubt as their relation to the verb guta, pour. This relationship is supported by information in Jordanus, according to which the original ancestors of the Goths bear the name Gaut, manuscript Gap. According to Jordanus, the Goths originated on the island Scanza, as from a workshop of the tribes or from the womb of people. It has therefore been assumed that the Scandinavian Gautar were the original tribe, and the Gutones split off of them, meaning that the name Gutones must be secondary. In the meantime, however, confidence in the origin saga and Jordanus has been shaken off. Furthermore, the island Scanza is not autochthonous. The linguist's data must therefore be interpreted with some caution. Gutan cannot be derived from Gauta. Gutan is a primarily deverbal agenitive formation, probably meaning sperm, pour, equal men. Theoretically, Guta could have the same meaning. In this case, however, we would be dealing with semantic competitors, not with lexical variants. Historian on the Goths, Herwig Wolfram, says that their classical contemporaries would have viewed the northern barbarians as virulent pests, the cold climate nurturing a desire to fornicate like rabbits and spawn new hordes like mosquitoes flowing forth out of the swamps of Germania every year to wreak havoc. The further step into suggesting pourer of seed or sperm as to mean man is confusing to me personally, since the Goths would have called themselves Gutans, which means they would have referred to themselves as just the men, or specifically the pourers of sperm, based on the sexual reference. I'm aware that sometimes an ancient name that sounds evocative might render as something anticlimactic in our tongue, but I'm not sure how sold I am on this pitch. Jordanus makes the claim that his Gauti Goths come from Scanza, which there seems to be debate over whether this really was Scandinavia or not, but the main complaint of Jordanus is that he allegedly stitched together a bunch of different histories of unrelated people, which is the Goths and the Thracian Dacian people, maybe the Gittae. They'll pop up later. It is fun to think of these proto-Vikings from Scandinavia, a potential origin land for these Germanic Goths, Gutans, as mentioned by Jordanus, foreshadowing similar events a half-century later. Here in the Clisby Vigfusen Old Norse Dictionary, Goti, plural Gotnar, the Goths, hence Gotland. Pause if you want to read a little more of this, but here I think there's an interesting connection, that in Old Norse this word Goti, which seems to have other relations to the word Goti, meaning like a priest, means a Goth. Does that mean it's already getting its own poetic establishment of an aesthetic sense, that the Old Norse had just as much of a nostalgic awareness for they have their own version of Gothicness as we do today? More on this tangent later on. In my Zoga Old Icelandic Dictionary, Gotar is a poetic term for man, so perhaps there is something to this association of potentially being highly prolific men, almost like calling themselves begotters, which might relate to the idea of father. I wonder if this part of the word beget, or past begot, typically of a man, sometimes of a man and a woman bringing a child into existence by the process of reproduction, has any relation? Later on, we'll see that Old Norse specialist on YouTube, Jackson Crawford, translates Gotar to mean father. The same Old Norse dictionary also cites Goti as a poetic term for horse. We'll see more on this horse-goth connection later on, but this concept perhaps relates to the seed spreader, impregnable animal motif, and to me it does ring of the Game of Thrones barbarian horde leader Khal Drogo's prophetic motto, the stallion to mount the world. Hydronym. Goth meaning men of Gotland, Gautelfer. Another potential meaning of Goth or Guton is one of Gotland. Riveting, I know, and it becomes even more of a headache when we try parsing it out. Gotland, Gotland, etc. I swear the basic information of these entries are so contradictory, but I think I can say that Gotha land is what we refer to as the southern portion of Sweden, and Gotland is an island off the coast of said southern Sweden. Gotland is both of the aforementioned and also not, with various articles claiming one tribe comes from one but not the other. My good. And so we have a real chicken and egg problem here, because some attest that Gotland is named after the Goths, or Gutons, or Geats, while others say it is the other way around. So which is it? They can't say that if Goths just means people from Gotland or Gotaland, then what the heck does, we're still not really quite sure what this Got part means, right? That doesn't really help. What on Middle Earth does Got mean? Here's some more hydronym etymological associations. Jordanes, who might be combining histories of the Gutons and another lower Danube River Thracian people, the Getae, writes of those called the Gothi-Goths. Gothi-Goth might have meant the Goths by the river Gaut, like Gauta Alv in this area of southern Sweden. Gauta Alv, or Gaut-Elfer in Old Norse, is a river in Sweden that originates from Lake Vänern and flows into the Kattegat in Gothenburg. Gauta Alv means river of the Geats and was changed in the 17th century from Gauta Alvin and Gaut-Elfer. By the way, the Geats are not supposed to be the same as the Goths, but yet their tribal names are somehow undoubtedly of the same Proto-Germanic root, both oblots of the same word. Oblots being like how there's run, ran, runner, etc. Dealing with the exact same root from the previous video, Gu. Many speculate these tribes originate from the same original group but split off to be distinct. More on the Geats later. Here are some more attestations I've found. You can pause it if you'd like. They're essentially saying that this flowing or pouring from the word Gu is related to this idea of the hydronym, that these people come from this area of all these rivers and this flowing river motif, and so that's why they have this name, is that Goths or Gutons means people of the flowing riverland or something. Quote, Gaut means shedding, flow, current, rapids, either after the Schroheim Falls or possibly in its property of being the outlet of the Lake Vänern. So we're almost back to our first suggested root to mean to pour, since this river where the Goths or Gotons would have been associated with this was very turbulent or gushing. Could it relate to the nearby Trollhättan Falls? So in this sense, Goths, Gutons, Geats are the gushing river people, or the people living where the rivers have their outlet. There are plenty of rivers in the southern Swedish area, which would make sense that this Proto-Viking-esque peoples would have had some associations with navigating such landmarks. Several place names in southern Sweden have plenty of Got prefix names like Gotlunda, Holy Grove of the Gotar. So today, if Gauta Alv, also known as River of the Geats in English, yet Geats, they're telling us in this instance, means gushing or poured, that means Gauta Alv renders as River of the people from the gushing river. Ironic. I know that there are apparently some hills in the United Kingdom that are Celtic Germanic Frankensteins that end up redundantly rendering to something like hill, so that this isn't quite so out of the ordinary, like apparently Bredon Hill, meaning hill. Here is an article by John Paul Strid for more details on this hydronym name and more information about toponyms in Gotland and how they might elucidate more of this enigmatic etymology. Ethnonym, Goths as the sacrificers or the pourers of blood or libations. Another related tribe asserted to be both etymological and literal kin are the Geats, the same folk that Beowulf hails from, the Old English Getas. These Geats or Getas also go by Wetteras or Wettergetas. According to scholar Stephen Pollington, these words are phonetically related to Gotar, people of southern Sweden, and also the Goths, who call themselves Goutons. With the etymological root in mind for gu to potentially mean to pour, maybe a libation or even of blood, could Goutons or Goths mean the sacrificers or libationers of blood, or worshippers maybe in a sense? Once again, Jordanus of the 6th century, writing around the later time of the Goths, is one of our scarce resources, and he does mention pagan Gothic practices reminiscent of later Norse pagan accounts of tree hanging sacrifices and pouring of men's blood. Quote, "This Mars the Goths have always placated with cruel practices, since his victims were dead captives, thinking that the governor of warfare would be pleased properly by the shedding of men's blood. To him they offered the first bounty, for his weapons were hung from trees, and more than others they had a stronger sense of religion, since their worship of a god they regarded as bestowed upon their ancestor." Jordanus from the Getica. The ending part about the ancestor is extremely important for a later discussion. The sacrifice scene is reminiscent of the later, although much more macabre, account from Adam of Bremen in the early 11th century at the Temple of Uppsala in Sweden. No doubt the tree hanging is an Odinic concept. Quote, "The sacrifice is of this nature. Of every living thing that is male, they offer 9 heads, with the blood of which is customary to placate gods of this sort. The bodies they hang in the sacred grove that adjoins the temple. Now this grove is so sacred in the eyes of the heathens that each and every tree in it is believed divine because of the deaths or putrefaction of the victims. Even dogs and horses hang there with men. A Christian 72-year-old told me that he had seen their bodies suspended promiscuously. Furthermore, the incantations customarily chanted in the ritual of a sacrifice of this kind are manifold and unseemly. Therefore, it is better to keep silence about them." Adam of Bremen, History of the Archbishops. Gottar is one of Odin's most frequent names in the skaldic literature, and therefore it has been suggested that Gauter is one of Odin's oldest names. Gothic historian Wolfram thinks this is potentially Scandinavians having Odin retroactively subsume some other god or deity named Gaut, along with some other older gods along the way, hence his many monarched nature. This is much debated. Many of Odin's names reference the same motifs, hanging, horses, war, and spookiness, relevant to his myth, so parsing out which names could be the absorbed names or entities might be difficult. Or it could be shown that this isn't even the case, since some of these attributes go back to the 1st century with Tacitus. Trees, horses, war, sky, father, spookiness, and hanging are common names and associations for Odin. We've seen that hanging and sacrifice to be heavily correlated, but we'll also see that hanging is connected with horses, used in a grim metaphor for hanging likened to riding as the victim sways or writhes, which also requires a tree or pillar of some sort to accomplish such a deed. Hanging from trees is well established as already mentioned above, so Odin and sacrifices by hanging on trees are intimately connected it seems, and as it relates to his famous myth of the self-sacrifice in the world ash tree Yggdrasil. You can see here from the Clisby Vigfusen Old Norse Dictionary that we have Gauter and Gotter. I don't know how to even really distinguish between the pronunciation of both of those things. So we have Gottar, a Scandinavian person in western Sweden. Geaties, and to be distinguished from Gotar, Goths, hence Gotland. And then right below Gautar is Gautr, a poetic name for Odin. And this entry seems to say that Gautr, the second entry, seems to either mean father or a man. Once again, much like how they attest that Goths themselves seem to be man or father. And so here's from some of the Old Norse literature where we find this name Gautr being used in association with Odin. So this is from Grimnismal, or the sayings of the Grim One aka Odin. And the line in question, Gautr och Jalkr myth Gotham. Okay? And so, translated into English, and I've got a few different translations, and we'll see what people decide to use for this word, because some people don't really know. Jalkr definitely seems to mean a male horse, okay? So that one seems pretty reliable. But Gautr is the one in question. First we got maker among gods. Okay, that kind of reminds us, and that's from 1908, the Bray translation, and that kind of goes back to that flowing or pouring of, seed, essentially, right? Maker, sort of begotter, as I said earlier. Jackson Crawford, 2023, who switches the order of it for some reason. He switches Jalkr and Gauter. And so yeah, he has gelding, which is a horse, and then father is what he uses for Gauter. Okay, kind of and same. It's kind of in line with the poorer of seed one once again. Then we got Bellows from 1923. Gaut and Jalk midst the gods, and here he has Gaut as father. Petit from 2023. Gauter and Jalkr among the gods. He has it as Gotlander, Goth, or sacrifice. Here's Andy Orchid from 2011. He seems to translate Gauter to mean sacrifice. And then last but not least, we have Caroline Larrington. She says, Gaut, this word appears most often as an Odin name, as in Grimnir's sayings, through other meanings such as sacrifice or Gaut, inhabitant of Götaland, a province of southern Sweden, has been mooted. So we can see that this word Gauter has a variety of meanings that apparently no one can settle on either. Gaut, to apparently mean father, maker, sacrifice, Gotlander. Odin once again living up to his many names, even with just one name. So we did it in showing that an Odinic name, Gauter, is etymologically tied to our word God. Something I thought was ironic since the Lombardic name for Odin, Godin, was really close in spelling. Well, it turns out Odin is somehow here anyway. The Gautar were the inhabitants of Götaland, the Getas of Old English, Beowulf, though the term may simply be a Heti for humans in general. Nick interprets it as referring to men as engenders, connecting the word with modern German Geissen to poor, and Meissner believes that such kinnings originally referred to the ethnic group and its connection with Odin, but later became associated with gods. Kuhn, supported by Krauss, argues that the word refers to sacrificial victims consecrated to the gods. Odin has many names associated with his self-sacrifice by hanging upon the world tree, so the name Gauter, meaning sacrifice, couldn't be necessarily out of the question. Although if we take the gu to poor root, it might be too much of a stretch to claim Odin's spear wound as blood-pouring libation sacrifice in his myth of hanging upon Yggdrasil. In fact, I could maybe even bend the Proto-Indo-European gu root any which way to fit a particular argument. For example, besides potentially meaning libation pourer, to pour, it could also mean to invoke through sound, which Odin obtains the knowledge of the runes from his self-sacrifice with a scream, a sound. Runes are symbols of captured meaning, to be applied phonetically, like an invocation. Odin's Proto-Germanic name, Wotanaz, translates to Lord of the Frenzied, which I think aligns with this aspect of the myth. I can't quite put my finger on it yet, but the concept of this frenzied, ecstatic state and the discovery of runes, basically language and symbols, feels intertwined. Maybe more on that on another day. Now I have one more Hail Mary pitch for an Odinic association with libations, or for this god root, which is still a pretty solid attestation in this pi sense, this Proto-Indo-European sense. And thus God, Goth, and Gauter could be an ultimate association with libation drinks like mead or ale. We know that mead is a heavily associated with Germanic Viking culture as well as Odin and his myths, but ultimately we can reduce mead down to a fermented drink, right? In some of the oldest archaeological finds referencing Odin and Germanic magic is the word alu, which most agree probably connects to ale, the fermented beverage. Survive the Jive and Dr. Scott Sheldon have an excellent discussion on this in his videos, so I highly recommend checking it out. The mead of poetry, as reported by Snorri Sturluson in his Skaldskaparmal, tells of a giant, Kvasir, being slain by two dwarves, who mix the slain's blood with honey to make the mead of poetry, which grants the ability of poets and scholars. Odin later steals the mead, which falls from the sky to mankind. In this context, the use of someone's blood, Kvasir's blood, is used to make a fermented drink, and seems connected to this sacrificial aspect of brewing. Could this sacrifice translation for the word Gauter be multi-layered, referring to not just a pouring of sacrificial blood, but perhaps pouring libations of ale or mead that could symbolically represent blood, not unlike the Christian Eucharist transforming wine into blood? So maybe perhaps Gutan, self-name of the Goths, could mean guys who sacrifice their alcohol or libations or something. Now talking about this Gauter equaling sacrifice possibility, is seeing maybe what context do we find this word in the literature. For example, Grimnismal 54, Gater och Jalkr meth Gotham, Gater and Jalkr among the gods. Here Odin is rattling off many of his names during this section, to which he says at line 48, by one name they have never called me. And in this stanza he says, among the gods he was called Gater, our mystery word, and also Jalkr. Jalkr definitely seems to be associated with a male horse. If you recall from above, hanging on a tree has been poetically described as riding a death horse, and hanging has been specifically associated with the cult of Odin and his myth, upon which even the very tree he hangs himself, Yggdrasil, usually gets translated literally as the terrible one's horse. This gets confusing since Odin has a horse already, named Sleipnir, so 'tis a bit odd to have a world tree named Odin's horse that doesn't refer to the actual horse that he actually has, and Yggdrasil is a contested translation as well. It's actually even more complicated since Drasil isn't such an easy fit to mean horse, since it's only usually used poetically, and the etymology is once again quite misty. It has been proposed that Drasil might have been the one who walks or saunters, a potential heiti for horse. It could also refer to a potential compound word from Old East Norse, Drasil, as shapelessly large, unwielding colossus, which might describe both the nature of a horse and a tree. Later on, this Drasil compound could have come to be a heiti for a horse. This might render Yggdrasil as terrifying colossus, which might still work as both a name for a world tree and a grim name for reinterpreting the world tree as a deathly gallows from which the self-sacrificed god would ride on. Without trying to get too off track, Yggdrasil might relate to Irminsul, a revered pillar or tree of the Saxons that was destroyed by Charlemagne during their forced conversion. Irmin from Proto-Germanic Irminaz, Old Saxon Irmin, tall, strong, exalted. And then this last part, sil, sul. Sul from Old Saxon, sil, Old English, sul, Old Norse, to mean column, pillar, or wood beam. So therefore, Irminsul would be a strong and tall wooden beam of some sort. We do see in the Havamal, aka the sayings of the High One, aka Odin, Odin regales us that he hung on a windswept beam, basically literally being like a tree. Here, Medthi means bowl, longitudinal beam, poetically used to mean gallows in several instances throughout the literature. Tacitus has been mentioning hanging sacrifices and the Germans since the 1st century. So can we assume that this hanged god sacrifice motif to be an ancient core to the Odin Wotan archetype? With all that in mind, if Gater is equal to sacrificed, and Jalkr is horse, which are associated with being hanged and sacrificed as we just discussed, could those two words in close proximity in this stanza mean that this could be a subtle nod to the Odin self-sacrificing hanging myth? Might this be enough to back-engineer the meaning of Gater to mean sacrificed one, or the one you sacrificed to or something? Or if Gater to mean sacrificed, and then maybe God is the one you sacrificed to? Moreover, the full line is Gater and Jalkr among the gods, meth Gotham. Now remember from the last video on the word God, Gotham is being translated as gods here, and this is written all down well after Christianization. It still etymologically connects to the word Goth, Gutan, Geat, and Gater. So we have the word Gater and Gotham in the same line. Two words that are etymologically related, and to me, when we pronounce Gotham, it might sound like Gotham, how we pronounce like Batman City, right? Which still sounds like Goth ultimately. But one can almost squint at the meaning to mean that Odin was called Gater among the Goths instead of the gods. The Norse called the Goths Gatars. This gets confusing because in Icelandic literature, Odin is sometimes referred to as Gatatir, the god of the Gatar. I know. This is not a real academic take on any of this translation stuff by any stretch. I'm going off gut here. But the sonic coincidence is there for me. And it will turn out another potential meaning for Gutan, or Goth, is descendant of Gaut. And that this ancestor has been heavily correlated with Odin. So in fact, Odin might have been called Gaut among the Goths after all.
Fifth, etymos. Theophoric name. Goths, as in those of Gaut. Of these heroes, the first was Gaut. This concept of heroic ancestors achieving semi-dios, half-gods, also called Gothic onsis, is another consistent motif in this cultural exploration we've seen. Onsis is assuredly associated with the concept of the Asir, mostly known for their iteration in the Norse tradition as the tribe of gods associated with Odin. If you recall earlier, this is definitely cognate with the Old Norse word for god, Os, singular of the Asir. The Gothic A letter is named Aza and cognate with Proto-Germanic Ansuz rune and Old English Os rune. Runic text found on a 2nd century buckle found in Denmark writes Ansawiya. To the Ons I dedicate this. This root might be found on the Gothic Ansis word for divine ancestor that Jordanes uses. The Proto-Germanic Ansuz rune and Old Germanic Ask, Old English Ask, Old Norse Oscar, relates to the ash tree and spears. More Odinic motifs. The world ash tree, like the Norse Oscar Yggdrasil, is a major theme in the Eddas, a massive column or axis mundi that connects all of the realms. This motif of a central pole might relate to the Indo-European tent pole or central pillar in the Great Hall, perhaps further associated with lineages and tradition. Ons in Gothic means beam, rafter. Ansa in Proto-Germanic is beam, Old Norse os, thick beam or pole. Ansu in Proto-Germanic is god. Could the Indic tradition of connecting the king post or main pillar of the family to the breath be related? As if the ancestors or are the gods holding up the world and its order to orient around. The tradition of the ancestors, one that you actually orient your familial culture around. But Indo-European os, one of these onsis osir roots, means mouth, which can invoke not only speech, but also that of flowing waters, rivers. Os in Old English is god, but also connected to mouth, speech. Os in Latin is river, specifically the mouth of a river. Although the Old English version of Odin, Woden, has no surviving tradition of him learning or gifting the runes, in the Old English rune poem for the letter Os, he is associated with language, not unlike his screaming for the runes I mentioned earlier. Os bith ordfruma olera spraka wisdomes ratu. A god is the origin of all language, wisdom's foundation. This Os, god, survives today in names like Oscar, meaning god spear. The Old Icelandic rune poem for O is very similar. Os Aldingater, Valhalla Visser, Oskar Jofer. O, the letter, is ancient Gautr, Valhall's ruler, Asgarder's warrior king. We even get another Gautr equals Odin mention here. Through a theological process, descendants of ancestors are animated to life through the breath, as if the winds of one's ancient hero forefathers' air still gives life to them in the present. Jordanes already mentions the sacrifices to the gods, was also akin to honoring an ancestor. And here again he is mentioning this onsis, divine ancestor, semi-dios concept. Quote, "Then the Goths were aware. They took their weapons and soon overcame the Romans in the first clash, slew Fucus, and looted the treasure from the amp of the army. Because of the great victory they had gained in this region, they thereafter called their foremost men, through the whole luck they had won, not mere men, but demigods, that is, onsis. Their lineage, as I shall say briefly, or who was born from which parent, and where it had its beginnings and ending, to this they listened attentively when it is spoke. Of these heroes, the first was Gaut, as they tell in their own stories." Jordanes, Getica. Now here's where all hell goes Ragnarok. It appears the Goths have a warrior ancestor named Gaut, a warrior with divine favor, or weird, attaining semi-divinity, so that once again, Gaut has this ambiguous relationship to the words Goths, Gutans, Geet, God, etc. The Lombard kings Auduin and Alboin called themselves Gausi or Gati, and had a progenitor god hero named Gausus. Hothagot, the founding father of the Saxon tribe on the continent, also has the Gaut stem in his name. The royal clan of Essex also traces itself back to a Geat, Gaut, and this figure also heads many of the genealogies of the Anglo-Saxon king lines whenever trying to extend beyond Woden or Odin in some cases. But this concept of divine destiny, godly favoritism is relevant to several things, from divine right of kings, and the Woden and Gaut, Geat kingly lineages of the Angles and others, and the divine weird that Beowulf speaks of. The divine right of kings, ordained by God, was manifested into reality by a warrior king named Gaut, through which his lineage held this sacred office. Nennius, a Welsh monk in the 9th century, nearly touches on this joke I've been trying to hint at this whole time, who traces a king list back up to Geat, was the son of a god, but not that god. Quote, "They were commanded by Horsa and Hengist, brothers, and sons of Whitgils. Whitgils was the son of Witta, Witta of Wecta, Wecta of Woden, Woden of Frithowald, Frithowald of Frithowulf, Frithowulf of Finn, Finn of Godwulf, Godwulf of Geat, who, as they say, was the son of a god, not of the omnipotent God,
and our Lord Jesus Christ, who before the beginning of the world was with the Father and the Son and the co-eternal and of the same substance, and who in the compassion of human nature descended not to assume the form of a servant,
but the offspring of one of their idols, and whom, blinded by some demon, they worshipped." Nennius, Historia Britonum. Beowulf also speaks of a favorable weird, or fate, or destiny. Like he's an omnipotent character in a story who he knows he's destined for a purpose, a path laid out by higher forces for him to be a conduit or realization of something higher. Beowulf is aware of the tides of destiny and has his surfboard ready. But this exact divine favoritism is exactly what gave these early ancestor hero kings their legitimacy, winning battles and glory. Oh, and Beowulf himself, don't forget, is a Geat. Yes, we're back to the earlier mentioned Geats and Geatas, another offshoot from the Goth and Goths at some point in time, or maybe they're all actually the same, who knows. Throughout Beowulf, the Geats are also called Wetter Geats, Wind Geats, or Wetterers, Wind Folk, and Sea Geatas, Sea Geats. Here, J.R.R. Tolkien will translate Geotena Leoda, Magan Hrethmana, as the Gothic Knights, the strong band of Hrethman. No, not those Gothic Knights. Tolkien makes the case that Hrethmana could be identified as a national name, instead of the usually translated noble host or men. Hreth is an Old English verb that appears twice elsewhere, variant forms Hroth and Hrothar, and verb Hrethen, exult, triumph, which is a premise of it being one of a sound or exultating, shouting, and triumph. Hreth, Hroth!
Right now! Right now! Right! Right for ruin and the world's ending! Yeah!
Forms parts of personal names like Hrethik, Hrothgar, and Hrothulf. The element Hreth is, according to Tolkien, associated with the Goths, Old English Goten. Therefore, Hreth Goten in the Old English poem Widsith and Kenilwulf's poem Elena, here Goths, Hreth, can stand alone. So Hrethahyr army is equal to Goths in Elena. And another Old English element Hrad corresponds to Old Norse Hred, as in Hredgotar, correlating the Goths with riding and cavalry. This same element is among the oldest member of the Geatish royal family, mentioned in Beowulf as Hrethel, with other forms like Hredels and Hredlan. The Goths seem intimately tied to Odin from our earliest mentions, yet also claim ancestry from a guy named Gaut. Gothic folk had their own sacral king called a Theodons by Jordanus. Theoden even sounds like Theoden, king of Rohan from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Tolkien also brings up Odin as a storm wind god, associated with the wild hunt, and connects Hreth and Hroth to Old English and Old Norse Hrid, storm. Therefore, we're starting to see an alarming number of overlapping elements between Geats and Gutona's Goths, aside from their initial Oblot clan names. If the Goths and Gutons were associated with horses and cavalry, can we tie this to my earlier mentioned connection with Gauter and Yoker, horse, in the Grimdismal? And perhaps even that first etymology and the idea of the impregnable horse, prolific spawning, breeding, begotters, fathers? Moreover, are Odin and this Gaut hero the same or different? Can we separate out the Gautish properties from the Odinic ones? Provocative breakdown of more Gautish fertility cult speculations by Ingemar Nordgren can be found here. How do we actually know that Odin subsumed properties of Gaut along his way, or rather, was it just the same deity the whole time? Contrary to what we said last essay, that God and good have no apparent relation, we have Swedish linguist Elof Hellquist connecting this very concept, God is good, through Swedish goda, to make good or better, as in the soil or people. Old Swedish gopa, Icelandic geta, Danish goda, in reference to soil, and corresponds to Middle High German guten, to make good, to enrich, from a Germanic word godian, based on God, good. But this could be a real harvest here, pun intended, for this gets us to an interesting etymological connection for God, perhaps as an act of gooing, aka pouring libations or sacrifices, onto a field to grant it fertility and enrichment. Hence, God is good. Literally, the ancestor creator God has fertilized the land. Perhaps somehow all of these aforementioned meanings and etymoses converge into one, like a hyper-object you think you've grasped, when it's only one face of an infinite-sided shape. This concept of Aryan Christianity starts to make a lot more sense to me in this context. Back in ye old school days, hearing about divine right of kings in history just seemed illogical. What made people actually organize like this? But in this light, during times of extreme human experience, from Rome rising and collapsing, new ethnic groups vying for land and control, having an exemplary warrior hero king that secures land for your culture to thrive was a big deal. After such success, he becomes more than man or hero. He becomes eternal, divine, godlike, an actual manifestation of your culture's God and highest ideals. So great that his kinsfolk become forever associated with him, adopting his name as their ethnic name, a theonym, not unlike the Skildings, who also take their name from a divine ancestor, Skild. One could become the living continuation of a godlike entity, carrying some of the same blood and breath through to the present. Hence the relation of the word king to kin. Through such nobleness, one could ascend to godhood or sainthood through heroic deeds. I almost chuckle to myself when I think of Wolfala's conversion of the Goths, or Gutans, or Gots, or Gotans, because I imagine this scene with him getting frustrated over them using Gaut, or Gut, as the answer for everything. Literally, their god, cultural rites, origins. What's the name of your god? Gaut. Okay, how do y'all worship him? Oh, we Gugat. Okay? Oh my god. It has a ring to it. So just like God, Gaut also seems to be everywhere, along with Odin. Gothic aesthetics. So here's where I try to wrap this up with questions pondered from the beginning. What does Goth mean? Does its etymology explain anything about Gothicness? Does its close relation to the word God have any deeper significance? It seems without a doubt now that our word God, Goths, and Gaut are related, and my quest was to wonder if this Gaut-Odin concept or entity could be leaking into the current usage of the word Goth. The guttural feeling of sheer awe and wonder, almost beautiful terror when viewing a Gothic cathedral. Or the sublime context found within Gothic literature, the ghosts and horrors of the past being intertwined with protagonists' inner struggles, in a world of deep past forever swallowing the present, yet also reminding us of its bounded presence through the chains of cause and effect. Since horror is one that is birthed from the womb of time. Some of the offered etymologies for God is one that suggests terror, horror, and awe. Many of the same attributes I have explained and have associated with Odin. Like the tree of Yggdrasil, terrifying, colossal, a concept or object so big that it can inspire but also cause one to tremble, much like God. Goths seem to have accrued quite a cultural badge, impressing upon their classical neighbors and then later nostalgicized by Norse Vikings, and other medievalists. And they've given us one of the most powerful words in the English conception: God. The word God, from most accounts, must have some sort of religious or spiritual connotation, but here, if it is connected to Gaut, the mythic hero, then he is somewhat of a supernatural being, a ghost that lives in the breath of his descendants. He can bless or terrify. Buried deep in our socio-linguistic pattern brains, whenever we say God, is there a chance we're invoking an ancient warrior hero of old, and that his energy remains, however faded, until this very day? Whenever you say, "Oh my God," or "Praise God," is there a subtle royalty payment to Gaut or Odin? The Gothic fashion culture, one of melancholy and pessimism, makes me wonder if this is Gaut and his fertility cult winter phase, death-like, introspective, awaiting his inevitable doom and rebirth. The sublime essence of Gothic is Odinic.